Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room, which doesn't use Mode 7, but this game does because it's F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. The game may be called F-Zero, but you know it's number one when it comes to 1991 futuristic racing games on your Super Nintendo. It's time to put down that blast processing for a moment and get with the Mode 7. And then pick up blast processing later, because I'm still a Sega fanboy at heart, but I really admire F-Zero, and it's a great game. This is the first of many F-Zero racing games, but I think fans of this series will agree that it's still not enough. F-Zero should be a household name by now. And while it's popular, it's maybe not as popular as a game like Mario Kart, probably because it's not nearly as approachable as Mario Kart. F-Zero is brutal. The game is frequently cruel. You don't get a trophy for just turning it on. It's fast, pretty much everything will kill you, and the enemy drivers are complete douchebags. Try to get in first, and stay there, otherwise your race is gonna be tough. All it takes is one little mistake and your championship is over. Few games are as dependent on track memorization as F-Zero. You must know every turn well before you approach it. And even then the odds are stacked against you. There's 4 vehicles, 3 championships, and 3 difficulties. The game is hard on beginner. And it only gets insane from there, but this comes on the heels of the 80s arcade era, when games were hard. Games were meant to take your quarters, and this feels like an 80s arcade game. But it looks like the future, making brilliant use of Nintendo's Mode 7, which does something with the spinning in the backgrounds, making it, giving it that F-Zero look. And then there's the music, which is great, and I think what's most impressive is that for a 1990-1991 release, it still plays really well today. I particularly enjoy the way the camera flies out and then turns around to show you your smoldering corpse from a distance. It sort of highlights the futility of what you're trying to do. Win races? Yeah, good luck. If you want to play something easy, why not try F-Zero GX? That was sarcasm, by the way. F-Zero's relative simplicity combined with its super smooth gameplay makes it a far more playable game than a lot of the mid to late 90s PlayStation racers. And unlike Wipeout and a lot of other futuristic driving games, you're not relying on your offensive power, you're relying on your driving skill and memorization. You don't have guided missiles or flamethrowers, sadly, but each time you pass the starting line you pick up some boost, and keep an eye out for the repair strips, which come in handy when you're about to explode and die. It's not a huge game by modern standards, but there's a couple different environments, each with a few tracks, and F-Zero sold a lot. In fact, this is one of the Player's Choice million-seller re-releases, so there's at least 1,000,001 copies out there. Also, you can just download it from the Virtual Console. I've got a Classic Game Room Year 2560 and Mode 7 shout-out to send to Alex from Wildwood, Missouri. Thank you for sending F-Zero all the way into space for Classic Game Room. Recommended, you know it, this is pretty much a must-play for all Super Nintendo owners, and even most of the Genesis ones as well. F-Zero. The year is 2636. Jar Jar Binks is president, and aliens have invaded to put us out of our misery. But these two mungheads didn't get the message, and they're going to fight the aliens aggressively in Contra III, the Alien Wars. It's a bug hunt on your Super Nintendo from 1992. What a beautiful game. It's Contra. How do you go wrong with Contra? You don't. Contra wins every time, except you won't win, the first time at least. This game is tough. Way harder than the other two that came before Contra and Super C on the NES. This is Super! Wait, no, I'm sorry, it's not Super, it's just Contra 3. They took the Super off. Even though it's on Super Nintendo, those dogs are so irritating. You gotta shoot them with homing missiles. Love this game, but it is difficult. And the tank is great. Backing over enemies is... the cure for the common afternoon. Love the additional weapons in Contra 3. I could do without the ultra tricky platforming segments, but I'm never any good at those. If you like them, hey, they're here. How about some big boss battles? Giant mutant alien turtle, anyone? Yes, Contra 3 has it, and many more. Difficult end bosses. We've got some top-down action here, which I didn't like at first. It kind of grew on me. You gotta get used to the controls where you rotate the screen with the L and the R buttons on your Super Nintendo controller. This is a great game, actually. One of the best on Super Nintendo. I was pleased to see that they included it in the Super NES Classic Edition, where it rightfully belongs. This is one of the best Super Nintendo games, I think. Even though it's not one of my favorite Contras. Like, it's up there, I suppose, but I like the first two on the NES better. But this one does have an awful lot of style, and it does manage to retain that thing that makes Contra good. But the level designs just aren't my favorite in the series. I like the backgrounds though, like the giant tornadoes spinning in the background. They're super cool, but... Anyway, I'm just splitting hairs. Contra 3 is pretty amazing. It's just that it follows on the heels of two of my favorite games of all time. Even though this does add a nice 16-bit coat of paint and some additional unique challenges, like this weird thing crawling up the side of the wall, and here's this boss battle, which reminds me of Flash Gordon, which is always a good thing. Like the other Contra games, this is best enjoyed with a friend, two-player, on the couch, simultaneous co-op, slaughtering enemies together. Usually my favorite weapon in Contra is the spread shot, but this time around I like the homing missiles. I should note that you can carry two weapons at once in this game, switch between them. On the fly, you've also got some super bombs, which come in handy during the boss battles. The music is very good, the controls are responsive, and this one packs a lot of replay value because you've got to memorize the levels to get through them without dying over and over and over and over again, which usually happens to me because I suck at these games, even though I like them. Hey, it's like the Death Star background here. With big, useless spinning things. It's Contra, after all. This is what we expect from Contra. I love the guy's just running out of the door. Hey, there's a guy shooting with a machine gun right there. Let's just run right into him. Oh! My wings! Dumbass aliens. I mean, really, any game where you spin, jump, and fire at the same time, and you can change directions in midair, I mean, that's just a good game. That's a skill that we should all have. Hey, Mark, can you grab me a beer? Sure, but I'm gonna spin, jump, and shoot while I'm doing it. Woo! Work off some calories. There we go. I was awful at this boss battle. And hey, I've got a classic game room. shout out and thank you going to my friend Mark from East Meadow, New York, who sent this to the show a while ago. Took some time to get into it, memorize these levels. Oh, I love this part. Not just because of the like future jet sled, but the future jet sled moves beneath him while he's spin jumping. So it's like he's got the force as well as nice bandana. Then there's this giant thing flying over the highway with laser beams. It seems very impractical, but so cool. It's Contra III, highly recommended for your Super Nintendo. Don't let Jar Jar win. Banished from Earth Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome back to Classic Game Room, coming to you from the Intergalactic Space Arcade in 2014 with the review of Battletoads Double Dragon for the Super Nintendo. It has Toads, but does it have the BJ theme? For Billy and Jimmy, let's find out. It does have some pretty good music on the intro, even if Battletoads and Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team, doesn't have the BJ theme from Double Dragon on the Neo Geo CD. It's a very different game because this one has Toads. Battletoads, to be specific. I can't say that I know much about Battletoads, to be honest. They always seemed like imitation Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to me. Except they're Toads. But we've also got Billy and Jimmy from Double Dragon, as well as a bunch of weirdo enemies, robots, and end bosses that you'll pummel with your fists and feet in predictable Double Dragon side-scrolling brawler beat-em-up action. Because you're fighting against the Dark Queen who wants to rule the Earth, and you know, from where I'm sitting, I don't see what the problem here is. She looks like she's ready to party. Let her have it! But nobody ever called Billy and Jimmy smart, and Toads certainly aren't very bright, so you're going to waste all your energy fighting everything on your way to the Dark Queen. Fighting in space without helmets. Love the realism. Anyone who's played a Double Dragon game before should know exactly what to expect here. Punch, kick, try not to take any damage. This is actually surprisingly difficult. Like most side-scrolling arcade-style brawlers, it's best enjoyed with a friend, so I'm playing with Brandon here. And we quickly found out that you don't want to get too close to each other, or else you'll start inflicting damage to your own teammate. Once again, they're not very bright. And just in case you forgot or aren't paying attention, let's take a look at who you're fighting against. All I'm saying is that a future of perpetual darkness never looked so good, so we really need to think about what it is we're fighting for. And if Battletoads and Double Dragon is worth your time, because frankly it's not the best Double Dragon game out there. It certainly has its moments, like pounding enemies through the floor, that's always good, but other parts of the game feel totally unfinished and really half-assed. After spending some time with this one, I've come to the conclusion that the developers are trying to milk 2 licenses instead of just 1, teaming up Battletoads and Double Dragon while delivering a really mediocre game. But like I said, it has its moments. I like the character animations and some of the fighting moves are quite funny. But it gets frustrating quickly. If your partner dies while you're fighting, you then have to restart at the beginning of the level, which is super annoying when the level is kind of long and disinteresting like that jet ski thing. And then we have the swinging parts of the game, which are just downright unplayable. So while I really don't think it plays all that well, there's better side-scrolling brawler beat-em-ups out there. I've got to give this game credit for having a good sense of humor. If I could recommend this one for a rental, that's what I'd do, even if it's 20 years old, and at this point you may as well just buy it if you want to play it. However, I do have a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Ahmed from Springfield Gardens, New York, who's already on the map here for sending that awesome Macross game a while back, Scrambled Valkyrie. You're much better off playing that game than this one. So there you have it, Battletoads Double Dragon. While it may be better than Double Dragon 3 on the Game Boy, it's not nearly as good as Double Dragon on the Neo Geo CD. Or the original Double Dragon on the NES. That's still my favorite. So thanks again, Ahmed. Well, I think there's better games that should be played in your Super Nintendo if you really love Battletoads and Double Dragon. Well, here you go. This game was made for you, maybe. Everybody get up off your seats and start the cheer. E.D.F. Earth Defense Force. But maybe not the Earth Defense Force you were expecting. From 1991 on the Super Nintendo, this is Earth Defense Force, with no relation to Earth Defense Force 2017 or Earth Defense Force Insect Armageddon. This is a side-scrolling spaceship shooter, where you are defending Earth with a defense force, consisting of you and a spaceship with unlimited ammo. Sounds fun, and it is. This game was released in '92 in the West and has a titling inconsistency. It says Super EDF on the game menu, but Earth Defense Force on the game itself. Whatever. EDF! EDF! What makes this game neat is that you start off by selecting a weapon, and you can choose from several, most of which are completely useless. It took me a few tries to figure out which weapons I really enjoyed. You level them up as you play through the game, and you can switch your weapons per level. Here's a variety of odd weapons, everything from grenade to atomic and slow-moving laser beams, which are all fairly useless on levels where enemies attack you from behind. If you've spent any time playing the Thunder Force series of games, you know that Hunter is the best weapon for clearing out waves of enemies. In Earth Defense Force, that same weapon is known as homing, but it's the weakest weapon in the game, so there's a bit of trade-off, but on the other hand, you can also shoot enemies above you and behind you and concentrate on moving and dodging. As you power up the homing weapon, it does become quite powerful later in the game. But it kind of sucks against end bosses when it takes a half hour to kill them. But the end bosses aren't very difficult either. In fact, the whole game is fairly average and not that challenging compared to some other heavy-duty shooters. The game reminds me a lot of Arrow Flash or Air Buster on the Sega Genesis. It's a fairly average shooter, and the weapon system keeps it interesting because that mixes up how you can play through the game. Unlike some shmups, there's no one specific way that you have to play through the game. Choosing the right weapon makes it easier, but if you memorize the enemy patterns, you could also try something completely different. I preferred the homing weapon, especially when it's powered up, but the super laser was also effective. It locks onto enemies and works similar to the homing weapon, except it fires extremely slowly. A laser that fires slowly, imagine that. You don't have lives in the game or extra ships, you have shields, which sort of act like lives. If you lose 3 shields, you're done. But you can also continue, and when you continue, you keep your weapon power up. So you can pick up the game and essentially continue from the strength at which you were previously playing. I made some sloppy mistakes while recording this level, so I'll just continue for the review. In general, the game isn't overly challenging, but it's also not ridiculously easy once you get to some of the later levels either. It's fairly well balanced and a decent 16-bit shooter on the Super Nintendo. It's got that smooth, easy listening Super Nintendo style music. The visual presentation is nothing elaborate, but still easy on the eyes, and it's a fun shooter for those who enjoy blowing up things with spaceships. With the funky bass riff in the background for the robotic space shrimp. EDF! I'm using the super laser here, so I'm going to throw this space shrimp on the Barbie. One bad joke per review is required. I like the music in this level, and this is where things start to get a bit tricky, but an upgraded homing weapon will take care of most of these enemies. Next time I went through this one with no problem. If you're still collecting games for your Super Nintendo, which you should be, Earth Defense Force is one that you should have on your list if you dig spaceship shooters. So, a big thanks to our friend Frank in California for sending this game to the show. I always enjoy blowing up spaceships while shouting things like, "Do you like death? Then die!" It's Earth Defense Force. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where I've got a wonderful, underrated gem on the Super Nintendo. This is Firepower 2000! Giant flamethrower! Woo! Great synth work. This is a very different sound than you would get from the Genesis. I like this. Really soft pads. I'm impressed. Released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo, this is Firepower 2000, a vertical scrolling arcade style shooter where you play as a little car with a cannon or a helicopter. And you've got to love this intro music, especially if you're a fan of 80s synth pop like me. The Sega Genesis catalog is filled with horizontally and vertically scrolling spaceship shooters and arcade-style games, not so much with the Super Nintendo, so Firepower 2000 is actually kind of an oddity. There's just something about this game, it's incredibly challenging, and a lot of fun. It's hard to put a finger on it until you play the game and get a feel for it, but this doesn't play like most other games in the genre. For starters, you can choose to play as a little jeep or as a helicopter. The helicopter's a bit faster and just shoots in front of it like most games in this genre. The jeep, on the other hand, can shoot in all directions. When you hold down the fire button, you'll lock fire in that direction. Also, the car will run into ground targets, so you can easily drive into tanks or enemy positions and explode. The helicopter, on the other hand, crashes into air targets, not ground targets. So it's like you have two totally different ways to play this game, and you can play with a friend simultaneously. There's lots of different ways to score points and a nice variety of weapon power-ups, including a flamethrower, always nice. And Firepower 2000 is way harder than it looks. The enemies shoot at you quickly, and they also use a lot of homing missiles. This is a really cool game for the genre, and one that I'm surprised you don't hear about more often. It has a different feel than most of these games on the Genesis or the Saturn or PC Engine. It's got that Super Nintendo sound, which works really well for the soundtrack in this game. And as you can see, this has your typical boss battles. You fight them, and collecting those stars throughout your mission gives you some bonus points, which you'll want to earn extra lives. Because by level 2, Firepower 2000 gets really challenging, primarily because the enemies are quick and tough to take down. you'll need upgraded weapons, so losing lives early in the game is very bad. If I don't get into level 2 with at least the spread shot, I'm doomed! And my game ends quickly. The more time I spent with this, I actually prefer the helicopter, even though the Jeep makes Firepower 2000 more interesting because you can shoot in all directions. The Jeep runs into things, and even if those things are like just trees or rocks, they don't kill you. They limit your range of motion. The helicopter flies over everything and just feels a bit more traditional. I found it easier to play with the helicopter. It's easier for me at least to get through the levels, but the boss battles are harder because you can't aim like you can with the Jeep. I'm a big fan of this game. I was really surprised. Another thing I like about this game is that the level designs themselves are pretty large and you can move the screens way to the left or the right as you're fighting your way through them, and discover a lot of hidden things scattered throughout, like those weapon cases, the yellow things. Invincibility bubbles, which are really useful. In fact, if you shoot them instead of collecting them, they blow up and turn into a super bomb, another thing to know. And those red X's on the top right of the screen are my special weapons. You'll want to collect them and preferably save them for boss battles. Firepower 2000 has it all, even in the future! And I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Keenan from originally Iowa when he sent this game, but now I believe he's in Washington, so thank you, Keenan. It took me a while to really sit down and dig into this, and I'm glad that I did. I highly recommend Firepower 2000 if you like these kinds of games and you're into the Super Nintendo. It's a great fit. One of the real gems in the SNES library. And you really don't want to lose your weapon power-ups. It's merciless without your weapon power-ups. You just don't get them back easily. Visually, this game looks really nice, and it's not abhorrently expensive to collect either. It's not like the shooters on the Saturn or PC Engine or something. You can buy Firepower 2000 for around 25 bucks, and it's worth every penny. It's got loads of replay value. I think there's 6 levels in total. And without continues, that means you'll be playing this game quite a bit to get through it. I'm still stuck in level 3. I haven't quite memorized it all yet, but I'm a big fan of this one. Highly recommended Firepower 2000! Let's take a look at the packaging. Firepower 2000 is one of the rare Super Nintendo games that I have in the box, so thank you, Keenan, for sending that. These typically don't withstand the test of time like my beloved Sega Genesis clamshells, so it's a bit faded, but still looks really nice. I like the cover artwork because it's different. The design of the vehicles themselves are bizarre. I love it. It's like the buggy from Moon Patrol. But it's not, because it's Firepower 2000. So thanks again to Keenan, and thanks to everyone for watching. Playing with the 8-bit 2 gamepad, wireless. Why does nobody ever talk about it? This is one of the best games on the Super Nintendo. Great sound, great gameplay, it looks cool. Ah! No! No! The world's been destroyed! Ah! Love that early 90s music that doesn't fit the game at all. Who's ready to blow things up with spaceships on the Super Famicom? There's two things you need to know about Super Aleste. One, this game is related to Musha. Two, this game is related to Godzilla. I've spent your money for you. You're welcome. Here's a piece of advice. This is known as Space Megaforce on the Super Nintendo, and Space Megaforce is insanely expensive. You're actually better off buying a Super Famicom and Super Aleste. You'll save money that way. And then you can play a whole lot of other great Super Famicom games. Super Aleste is, for whatever reason, like half the price of Space Megaforce. This is the sequel to the incredible Aleste, which I reviewed on the Sega Master System. And of course, these games are from Compile. They're related to Musha. This is as close to Musha as you're going to get on the Super Nintendo. In fact, this boss looks like one of the bosses in Musha, sort of. Needless to say, I love this game. It's worth every penny. It looks amazing. It plays great. It's basically Aleste, but Super Aleste, hence the title of the game. Pick up the weapon power-ups with the numbers, and then level them up and destroy enemies. It actually isn't too hard. This game is a bit easier than Aleste until about level 4, when it will hand you your own ass in super fashion. So, let me rephrase that. This game is hard, but the first 3 levels are pretty easy. They ease you into the gameplay, teach you the mechanics, and allow you to collect your favorite weapon and level it up. Because by level 4, it just gets nuts. This game gets crazy. So what you want to do is collect all of those little golden eggs or the green eggs, and they level up your weapons. And there's 8 different weapons to choose from that you see floating around on the screen. The missile is my favorite, number 5. If you've played Aleste, you know you immediately know what's going on. This game is also very similar to Xanac on the NES, which is in the Musha line of games, as is Spriggan, sort of. Spriggan is, aside from Musha, maybe my favorite. This one is like right after Spriggan for me. In my ranking, it's like Musha, Spriggan, Super Aleste, and then Aleste or Xanac. They're all good, except these enemies. They're very bad, like the evil Tron light cycle spaceship things that just overwhelm you. So this is what I'm saying. You need to have your favorite weapon pretty much maxed out. Number 3 is good. That's the circle shield, which is what I'm using here. But it's not so powerful unless you've leveled it up all the way. 7 gives you the Gradius-like options, and they're actually very useful in this game. The laser doesn't do much for me. 8 and 6 are pretty much ineffective, and the standard spread shot is not too bad, but what you really want, or at least for me, what I like to use is either 3 or 5. 3 or 5. If you flip it, it's 53, which is Herbie the Love Bug, which is fitting because this game is filled with love. Now, while I'm dying here on level 4, you gotta admire that background. It's very cool. This is easily one of the best Super Nintendo, Super Famicom games as far as I'm concerned. And I'm playing this on the actual Super Nintendo using the SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables, pulling out every bit of color and detail. And by Super Nintendo, I mean Super Famicom. I do not have Space Megaforce. It costs entirely too much. Super Aleste is a better alternative as far as I'm concerned. Also, I like the shape and styling of these Super Famicom games more. Did I mention this game is related to Musha on the Sega Genesis? If I didn't, I'll make sure to say it 3 or 4 more times. I'll show you in a bit, but Super Aleste has one of my favorite features of any video game ever, that more games should use. It's during a boss battle. I'll show you it near the end. Here's my weapon 3, the Circle Shield, leveled up all the way. Occasionally you can find some power-ups that max out your weapons. That comes in handy. And also you can take a couple hits when your weapons are maxed out. But like a lot of these games, when you lose your weapons... Ooh! It just turned into Bosconian. And the end boss! Screams in pain. That's what I wanted to show you. End bosses with the Wilhelm. More games need that feature. When you destroy end bosses, they shouldn't just explode or bleed. They should go, "Ah!" Here we go, level 8. If you thought 4 was hard, 8's insane because you destroy these giant ships, but then they shower you with shrapnel from behind. You're not getting through this one without taking a lot of damage. Stock up on extra lives. The thing on the top left there is your speed meter. You can pause the game and adjust your speed, but I think slow is actually plenty fast, otherwise I just fly into things. Have I sold you on this game yet? Love the background here in level 8 and the spaceships. It's a great looking game. The music's a little weird, an odd choice for the music, but otherwise I just think it's incredible. It's hard to think that there's 2 games in this series better than Super Aleste, but this is what happens when you get into the Aleste series. You're competing against Musha and Spriggan. 2 of the best spaceship games ever. So, save your pennies. This is worth it. It's a wonderful game. Super Aleste on the Super Famicom. Also, Space Megaforce on the Super Nintendo. It's so good! You're welcome. Like usual, I've got to pimp some products here. Check out my ultra-massive video game console guide series on Amazon. Old-timey pictures with silly captions in print. Now on Amazon. And I haven't had a chance to record the New Lord Carnage Club shoutouts yet, but I would like to add a big thank you to Tiago Pereira dos Santos Silva from Porto, Portugal! Thank you for joining the club. Look at those thrusters. They're firing into their friendly ships. These aliens aren't very smart. They are hard to destroy though. Jaki Crush from 1992 on the Super Famicom, a game that sounds like it could be the missing member of Motley Crue. Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee got drunk one night, kicked Jaki Crush overboard, never to be heard from again, until now. It's the 3rd in the series of excellent Crush video game pinball games. After Alien Crush and Devil's Crush and some Orange Crush comes Jaki Crush. Shout out the Japanese mythological devil thing. If you like those other games, you're gonna love this. Sadly, it's not on the TurboGrafx 16 like those other 2. This music sounds a little bit like Musha and visually reminds me of Thunder Force 3, but don't get your hopes up, Sega Genesis fans, or Super Nintendo fans, or TurboGrafx-16 fans for that matter, because Jaki Crush is, for whatever reason, a Super Famicom Japanese exclusive. If you've played those other games, you'll be familiar with this style, but for newcomers, basically, you've got this one funky table, which is about a 2-level table with a bunch of hidden areas spread throughout. And the more you play the game, the more you'll figure out what you have to hit to open up these other areas and score some big bonus points and stuff. It's a really tough game. Personally, I don't think the layout of the table is all that spectacular, but the style, the music, and the visuals more than make up for it. I found that most of the time the ball was down near the flippers, and what you do is you shoot those little purple demons running around in circles and they activate the ball save at the bottom, which is really handy. You definitely need that. And then once that's in place, you start chipping away at those dragons on the left and the circular area at the top for bonus points. But I think you'll find there's no easy way up to the top. It's a lot of trial and error. But there's still plenty of stuff to shoot for down low, just make sure you have that ball save in place. The super special secret areas kicked my ass, and like most of the old school video game pinball games, you'll find that the aiming off the flippers is nothing like a real pinball machine. There's no analog buttons on the Super Famicom controller. Every time you flip, it's all or nothing, and be careful when you have all the bumpers activated on the bottom. Jaki Crush can get frustrating quickly. Gotta love the music in this game, and I think there's a bit of a Street Fighter II inspiration in there as well. Not a bad thing, of course. And let me get ready to crush this. I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Frank from Lansing, Michigan. Thank you, Frank, for sending Jaki Crush to the show. I've been having a good time with this, but it is merciless. Multi-ball! While Jaki Crush has limited exposure because it's only on the Super Famicom, it's actually one of the less expensive Crush games. Compare it to Devil's Crush and Alien Crush on the TurboGrafx-16 and you'll save a couple bucks. If you think this looks cool but you don't have a Super Famicom or TurboGrafx-16, may I suggest Dragon's Fury on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, the Genesis version of Devil's Crush, and that's cheap and easy to find. Ah, fuck. That's like the guy from that Captain America game on the Genesis. It's Jaki Crush! Ah, fuck. From HAL, this is a 1991 Super Nintendo release. It's time to get in the zone. The Hyperzone. If you can stop rocking out to the music long enough to play the game, that is. This is an early Super Nintendo release and one that's quite impressive. It's like a cross between F-Zero and Space Harrier, as you pilot your way through trippy futuristic levels, blasting enemies for points. What's odd is that even though it looks like a racing game, it really doesn't matter how fast you're going, or how quickly you complete the levels. It's all about scoring.
which to me makes the game feel a lot more like Space Harrier than a futuristic racing game. At the end of each level, you'll also encounter a boss battle, which also feels a lot like Space Harrier. HAL is more famous for their Kirby series of video games. Hyperzone could definitely use a remake. It has catchy music and simple, clever gameplay. The game also makes fantastic use of the Super Nintendo hardware. It runs very smoothly, and it has some great music that will keep you entertained as you play through the entire game. 8 levels, which I beat on the 3rd try, and then the game loops. So it's not that difficult, but you're playing for the highest score. It feels like an early release on the Super Nintendo, like they could have done more with it, but either ran out of time or were still figuring out how to program for the Super Nintendo in 1991. Hyperzone can easily be found for an affordable price these days, eBayisably of course, and this game was sent to the show by our longtime friend and supporter Frank from San Leandro, California. Here's a look at a boss battle where you're fighting a giant Super Nintendo controller. The enemy should have been the Sega Genesis gamepad, come on! Hyperzone is a fun playthrough, and as you've probably noticed, you have to stay in the zone, or on the track, otherwise your ship takes damage. That's one difference between this game and Space Harrier. The enemies all do more or less the same thing. The trick is to keep moving, and as you play through the game, it will upgrade your spaceship, although there's not a lot of difference between them. HAL makes some great games, and this would be a terrific re-release for the Nintendo 3DS. With some updates, I think it would be helpful if you got scored for the speed at which you make it through a level. But it's what it is. It's an early release on the Super Nintendo, and one that plays smoothly and impressively. You know what this game needs? Enemies that look like giant floating eyeballs in space. Oh, it's got them! That's good. You can't have a game without those. There's no spoilers to give away because there's really no ending. The game just loops. You start from the beginning with your top-of-the-line spaceship. How many times can you make it through Hyperzone? It's a test of will. It's Hyperzone on the Super Nintendo. Thanks again to Frank in California. And don't worry, you get to fight the Super Nintendo gamepad one last time.
Banished from Earth Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where it's time to evolve from a harmless, worthless fish into a non-stop killing machine. This is E.V.O. Search for Eden. About 4.6 billion years ago, the sun had 9 smaller stars and named the third one Gaia. I would have named it El Camino Bacon Land, which sounds like a happy place, filled with bacon, and El Caminos, and magic Vectrexes that speak to each other, and play Sega 32X when you're not looking. That has nothing to do with this game. In this game, you start out as a fish and eventually evolve into something like a ham sandwich down the road. which also sounds... I should never record these when I'm hungry. So here I am, billions of years ago, as a fish who's eating other creatures and gaining evolution points. Doesn't that prehistoric fish look delicious? You just want to bread that thing, fry it, and wrap it in bacon, make a sandwich out of it, drown it in mayonnaise, and serve it with a tall glass of beer. I should design video games. They would all be exactly like that. But this game is nothing like that. E.V.O, Search for Eden, is like an RPG strategy fish simulator, where you start off as a very basic prehistoric life form and slowly evolve, gaining things like teeth and bigger fins, eventually legs, and you crawl out of water and start eating things on land. E.V.O is a game for very patient people. Because like the evolution process itself, it takes a long time. I mean, it took like an hour for Kevin Costner to grow gills. Hooray! I now have a tail! So what you do in this game is a lot of grinding. You eat everything in the sea and gain as many evolution points as possible, and then grow stronger, and eventually confront end bosses. It's really interesting. It's a very fascinating game. I like the concept, but it's all a bit tedious. Maybe I just didn't get it. I think there's different evolutionary paths that you can take. I was not able to defeat that boss until I grew bigger teeth. And then bit his ass into oblivion. Somebody sample that and make a ringtone out of it. After defeating a boss creature thing, you move on to the next level and face other monsters that you'll have to digest and evolve. The problem is it just takes forever. It's like watching grass grow. It's not something you want to pay attention to. Just leave it to nature, it'll take care of itself in the background. But somebody in Japan thought they would put it in the foreground here, mixing evolution with a JRPG. It's fascinating, but the gameplay and the boss battles aren't interesting enough to keep the game exciting. The evolution part's the coolest feature in the game because you choose what you want to evolve. Your jaw, your tail, your fins. What I really want to evolve into is Mechagodzilla. But instead I guess I'll have to settle for a bigger fish. It's an interesting game, not one for me, not one for people who have absolutely no patience, like me. The grinding and the combat just take the life out of a game about life. However, I'm glad to have played it because I never imagined a game like this would exist. So, I do have a classic game room shout-out. And thank you to send all the way to Tim from Prestonburg, Kentucky. Thank you for sending E.V.O, Search for Eden, to the show. I ended up getting stuck as an amphibian for all eternity, but according to the walkthrough I was trying to follow, you eventually turn into mammals and birds and people and stuff, if you have the time and the patience to evolve. As for me, I'm happy to eat these creatures before they have time to evolve into telepathic beings that eventually take over the Earth. Cybernator. Banished from Earth, classic game room broadcasts from the intergalactic space arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where Mecha March Madness Month continues with the review of Cybernator on the Super Nintendo. Enjoy! From 1993, this is Cybernator from NCS and Konami, one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. And a game I only recently discovered, but I absolutely love it. And it's not hard to see why. Giant robot, lasers, spaceships. Sold! Thankfully, the gameplay is as awesome as you hope it'll be. It's a bit slow, but you are piloting a giant mech after all, and the controls are fantastic. It plays really well. And Cybernator is quite tricky and gets really difficult in the later levels. It's got that beautiful 16-bit look to it. I love the graphics in Cybernator. The music's a bit hit or miss for me in this one. I'm gonna have to go there and say this one would be better with the Aeroflash soundtrack from the Sega Genesis. But all joking aside, the art design is solid. It's got that great early 90s anime-inspired look to it. It's just a cool game from start to finish. If you can finish it, I'll show you a little trick to help out with that later on. Something involving napalm. Always fun at parties. So check it out. The R button on your Super Nintendo controller deploys the shield. You're like a little Gundam. And that's helpful when fighting some of these smaller enemies that just tend to be pesky and annoying. Sadly, you can't stomp on the people in this game. That's one thing I wish they would have added, obviously. The L button will lock your firing into position, which is handy for strafing enemies and gun turrets and whatnot. As you play through Cybernator, you collect weapons, and you can upgrade those independently and switch between them in combat. But there's really only one or two that you need to worry about. The Vulcan cannon is a good all-purpose weapon. That's the machine gun. Later in the game, you get the laser, which is fabulous when you upgrade that thing. The missiles aren't too bad. You can punch enemies if you need to. And then there's the napalm gun. The napalm gun is a thing of beauty. It's like a flamethrower combined with a missile launcher. And you'll get that if you can pilot your way through the first level without shooting anything except the end boss. And that's actually easier than it sounds. The napalm gun really shifts the odds in your favor, but it doesn't make the game a cakewalk because it's not very good at destroying the smaller enemies that you can't stomp on. Why can't you stomp on the smaller enemies? Come on, go back and redesign this. You'll want to shift to your laser or machine gun for those bad guys. I wish they would have added little screaming sounds when the people jump off the edge. But then it would have been Metal Slug. Not that there's anything wrong with that. As you've probably noticed by now, you can rotate your gun turret, but sometimes it's just handy to lock it in place so things don't get complicated. And I've really got to compliment the designers on the backgrounds in Cybernator. It makes you feel like you're going somewhere throughout the whole game. You start in space, you fight through space stations, then you blast your way through a mountain range. It's just a really attractive game. It's got that retro cool style that everybody tries to copy now. Of course, back in the day it wasn't retro, it was just modern. And I think it's definitely a requirement for the genre that it has a cave level, which of course it does. Did I mention you can jump and hover? I probably don't have to, but you can. Solid game and a perfect addition to Mecha March Madness. This isn't one that you hear about very often, but it's fairly easy to collect, reasonably affordable online for your Super Nintendo. And I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Mark from Bremen, Germany once again. Thank you, Mark, for Cybernator and all the other awesome games you sent. Have Giant Lethal Robot, Will Travel. I think those are the sewer sleds from Akira, aren't they? Seems like the right time period. Cool game, highly recommended, and there's a lot of replay value in here because of the multiple weapon selection options. Also, you can collect some extra continues, search for a code online if you need them. which you might. Good fun. Cybernator, highly recommended. Thank you for backing the show on Patreon. Let's take a look at the game cartridge and talk a little bit more about giant robots that burst through walls and shoot people. Pretty sweet. I love this cartridge artwork and the little people running away from the giant robot with a machine gun. Like, none of you stand a chance. Go home. They used a great type font here too. Sadly, I don't have the box for this game, but the cartridge artwork is spectacular. This is the PAL version, so it looks a little bit extra cool, and I used the Retron 5 to play it for the review. Nice artwork on this one. The blues and reds work well together, and the angry robot is always a nice touch. Welcome to Classic Game Room for the review of Astral Bout on the Super Famicom, a surprisingly good fighting game, and this review has a surprisingly good ending. Released in 1992 from King Records and A-Wave, this is Astral Bout for the Super Famicom. And I'm pretty sure this tune was inspired by the music in RoboCop when he enters the club. Gosh, I love that scene. I love every scene in RoboCop. Back to this game, which sadly does not have a Western release on the Super Nintendo, and that's too bad because it's really good. It's mixed martial arts before that was really a thing. Choose your fighting style and battle your opponents to the death, or well, at least until severe injury, in front of a roaring crowd who is hopefully betting on you. How often do you see boxing versus lucha libre? And gosh, that guy looks a lot like the guy in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! On one hand, it's kind of a mediocre fighting game, but on the other hand, this was really ahead of its time. Because while it's a bit goofy, it's trying to do something realistic. These are actual fighting styles, and they're battling each other, and that's not something that you saw very often in the early 90s. So I'm playing as Mike Tyson here, battling Derek, who's all about lucha libre. After getting my ass kicked, I decided to step it up and go all Jean-Claude Van Damme style from Kickboxer. What this game needs is that scene where they stick their hands in the glue and then the broken bottles and then fight to the death. It's the dreaded post-burrito attack. You can punch, you can kick up, down, and straight ahead. You've even got kind of a special kick. You can double tap in one direction, jump and do a flying kick, or depending on which fighting style you're using, a flying something. Now, keep in mind, I know next to nothing about real fighting styles, MMA or martial arts or wrestling, but I've seen Bloodsport several dozen times, which makes me an expert in quoting Bloodsport. It's tough to fight the wrestlers because they're all grabby hands. You want to keep them at a distance, which is tough because there's no fireballs in this game and I can't do the Chun-Li helicopter kick. After each round you're scored and your opponent takes some damage too. They get tired, so you can win by points or knock them out. You can only take my foot to your head so many times and they just lay there on the ground, waiting for the game to end. While Astral Bout is far from the greatest fighting game out there, it's not bad. I rather dig the music, and the mixture of the fighting styles and overall gameplay makes it a worthy addition to your Super Famicom collection. Doesn't cost all that much either. Your judo cannot defeat my kung fu. Damn it! Use magic. Something. This game's got the basics covered. You've got a 2-player mode, which is what we're watching here, where I will eventually kick Derek's ass and then beat him to death with the GameCom. It's my special move. There's also a single-player mode where you choose your fighting style and battle all of the other fighters in the game. I kinda like this one. I had no idea what to expect, but it exceeded my expectations of not knowing what to expect. And I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Jeremy from, I'll probably mispronounce this, Cape Girardeau in Missouri. I like the music in this one. Good stuff. This fight went 3 rounds and eventually, Derek lost. And when Derek loses, terrible things happen to Derek. Yes! I've defeated you once again! And you know what that means.
Yeah, but I'm not even allowed to win on your show, so what am I supposed to do? And what? Oh, not this again.
Your brain is being melted in the R-Zone!
You know, there has to be a way. There must be some way to defeat the R-Zone. If only I could... Oh. I will defeat the R-Zone with a Danger Zone!
What's that? No! It's Kenny Loggins! Ah!
Actually, Mark was right. These are awesome! And they're great for self-defense. Self-defense in stereo.
I'm trapped in the R-Zone! Curse Derek and his use of Laserdisc technology to defeat me!
Kenny Loggins! He saved my ass today! I was gonna be in the R-Zone, baby, but then I found a way with Kenny! Kenny Loggins!
Zone of danger! Kenny Loggins! Banished from Earth Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. When I first saw the title for this game, I got really excited because I thought it was Captain Power. Remember the old TV show, which was amazing, but no, it's Jim Power. And a lengthy title I can't remember. The Lost Dimension in 3D. If you're up for a challenging game that's going to give you a seizure, this is it. Whoa, Space Harrier, anyone? It's Jim Power, The Lost Dimension in 3D. An ambitious game that tries to mash up just about every video game genre from 1993 into one game. And almost succeeds. Technically, it's impressive. The music is great, but I think they forgot that people would actually be playing it. I didn't actually realize there were this many colors in the rainbow. Jim Power feels like the developers tried to take every bit of horsepower that the Super Nintendo could throw at a game and use it all at once. So what you're left with is one of the most confusing yet still remarkably ambitious games that I've ever seen. Immediately, as you can tell, the music is really good and fits the style of the game. We start out with level 1 here, which is basic platforming, except every single trap, door, and spike, and enemy attack pattern from every other game in existence is used all at once. And the enemies will attack you with such speed that you have no chance of actually defeating them if you jump next to them, so you've just got to memorize the entire level, which is quite long, and feels like a patchwork quilt combined with an ice cream headache. So what we've got here is moving platforms over death spikes, arrows, fire, acid dropping from the ceiling dragons, enemies, and nearly impossible end bosses. And that's just the first level, it only gets harder. Hooray, we've escaped this madness and move on to the next level, which is like Gauntlet. And if you can get gym power through this one, you can make it to a spaceship level, which is harder than just about any spaceship shooter I've ever played in my life. So, whatever happened to Gym Power? My guess is that he never finished his own game and he's still stuck inside of the 3D dimension. It's been a while since I've played a game where it feels like you need to take Dramamine just so you don't get sick while playing it. I will really applaud the developers for trying some cool things here and using all of the Mode 7 technology or whatever, but it's like they just needed to back off a bit. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. However, at the time I can only imagine this would have been impressive, at least visually. Frankly, I don't find Gym Power to be the most playable game out there, and also I am disappointed it's not Captain Power. I mean, you can't use the word power and not have it involve Captain Power in one way or another. A late 80s TV show inspired by aliens and other action movies from the time that you could watch with toys and accessories like light guns to play along with the show. Now we have Romans dropping death barrels on me or something. I'll tell you, this game is interesting. It's the kind of video game you might want to play once and then never see again. Unless you're up for an extreme challenge, because it's damned near impossible. But I do have to give a Classic Game Room shout out and thank you to Wesley from Burlington, Vermont for sending this to the show. Home of Ben and Jerry's. Fitting for a game that will leave you with an ice cream headache. So there you go, Gym Power. I like the ambitious nature of the game. I love the music. I just don't really care for playing it. It's on the Super Nintendo. Enter the 3D dimension, if you dare. Welcome to Classic Game Room, coming to you from the new Intergalactic Space Arcade, where I've got a game that features giant robots blowing things up in 16 bits on the Super Nintendo. It's Mechwarrior, with giant robots blowing each other up. Did I already say that? It needs repeated. Giant robots blowing things up, gotta love it. The original Mechwarrior was released in 1989 for PC, and it's a game I spent a lot of time playing as a kid. So imagine my surprise to find that this 1993 Super Nintendo version is quite a bit different. It shares the same name and has giant robots blowing things up, but it's definitely its own game. Taking place in the Battletech universe, you're a mercenary fighting your way through battles to buy bigger and better mechs. The super cool part of Mechwarrior, for me at least, was always seeing how many weapons you can put on one of these things and still have it move. Kind of like Front Mission, and this game has that aspect of gameplay, or strategy. Because no matter how big your mech might be, if you don't have it equipped properly, you won't survive a single battle. And that, of course, means you have to strike a balance between your engine, power, armor, and weaponry. And in this game, that means how many homing missiles can I put on my giant walking robot, because the controls in this version of Mechwarrior are limited. This is not the PC game you may be familiar with.
I like that you start each mission dropping down from the sky and have to quickly get your bearings, then attack enemy robots. But keep in mind that this is a '93 release being played on the Super Nintendo gamepad. Controls are far from ideal for a first-person shooter-style game, which is why your best bet is homing missiles. After you pack your mech with a bunch of guns and armor, you can't move very well, you can't strafe, and it's jerky. So locking onto enemies and letting the missiles do the work for you seems to be your best bet. Oddly enough, for an action game, the strength here isn't the action, it's the strategy. How do you equip your mech and what's the best mech for the job? Because each battle plays out more or less the same. You drop onto the playing field, try to eliminate your enemies from a distance before they get close, and then jump around if they do get close so they can't machine gun you. All the while backing up and just hoping that your armor can withstand some damage. While this is cool and I would have definitely liked this game back in 1993, it lacks the finesse of the original, which had excellent controls. Now it's also been quite some time since I've played it, but I do remember being able to run around a much wider area. The old school dialogue screens are pretty cool, and you can even try to haggle with your employer before you take a job, thus earning more money that you can spend on bigger, better giant robots with more guns. Mechwarrior is a pretty popular series. I mean, who doesn't like blowing things up with giant robots? There's been numerous sequels, but this is the first game as seen through the 16 bits of the Super Nintendo. I like the strategic aspect. Do I repair my mech and buy new weapons, or do I save money and just go for the biggest badass robot that I can get? Questions you'll have to answer for yourself, but one thing is for sure, don't rely on manual aiming. Homing missiles, they're like homing pigeons except angrier and more explosive. So a big classic game room shout out and thank you to Daniel from Gloucestershire in the UK. Daniel assumed correctly. I do like giant robots blowing each other up. So thanks to Dan and his girlfriend for sending this to Classic Game Room. While I would recommend the PC version over the Super Nintendo version, Mechwarrior is always win. Welcome to Classic Game Room, coming to you from space. We all know that one of the greatest pleasures in life is blowing things up on a 16-bit game system like the Super Nintendo. This is Axelay from Konami, a company that knows how to make some good arcade-style games.
Playing it backwards. Not a great idea.
Prepare for one of the most interesting and innovative vertical scrolling and horizontally scrolling spaceship shooters ever on the Super Nintendo. What's that, Mark? You're reviewing a spaceship shoot-'em-up that's not on the Genesis? That's right. And you can tell right away, this is a Super Nintendo. I mean, obviously the game system says Super Nintendo, but the whole look and feel of Axelay is SNES. The vertical scrolling sections in particular have a really unique look to them that screams that whole Mode 7 thing that the Super Nintendo is known for. This effect like you're going around a spherical world. This is very cool and really impressive 2 decades after Axelay's release. Whose head exploded when this game was new? I dig the city effect in the background and like how things gradually come into view, even though the gameplay during these vertical scrolling parts isn't quite as good as the game looks. Although there's some tricky parts, fortunately your spaceship can take a few hits. You have 3 weapons when you begin each mission, and if something shoots you, you lose one of them. If you run into something, you just blow up. Axelay alternates between vertical scrolling and horizontally scrolling shooting gameplay, which I always enjoy in games like Vanguard and Thunder Force 2. It's nice here, obviously, with good-looking visuals, lots of detail in the background, and loads of enemies to blow up. You bring your 3 weapons into each battle and earn new ones throughout the game. So mix and match appropriately. The dual shot here is a neat weapon because you can spread it around you. And that's actually my favorite weapon in the game. Now, I've lavished Axelay with praise from start to finish and haven't even touched on the music yet. So I suppose I can talk about that the rest of the review because it's incredible. What you may not be able to tell from this recording is that in the new expanded Intergalactic Space Arcade, I've built a monster stereo surrounding an even bigger CRT television. And I've got this game blasting. Not only does it have great music, but incredible stereo separation. I think a lot of people take stereo for granted these days, although it's starting to come back with increased headphone usage on mobile devices, but the creators of the music just knew how to use the right and left speaker to make a great wall of sound, which enhances the gameplay and makes Axelay all the more memorable. Can you guys at home feel the bass? It's great. This game has some incredible music. He speaks the truth. The music in Axelay is impressive. Mostly impressive. In fact, pretty much all impressive. It's the guy from the packaging! Oh no! Oh, you're ugly! Nobody likes you! Axelay is so good that even Genesis fans can enjoy it. Yeah! Take that, you stupid witch's hat! Wait, no, there's more? No! Oh, it's a crab thing. Let the 90s console war rage, but leave Axelay out of it. I'm sorry I made fun of your hat. Let's be friends. Oh, you suck. Fuck you. I also like the title, Axelay. It just sounds cool. It is cool. It's Axelay. And check this out, I've got not one but 2 Marks to thank for this game. Mark from Bremen, Germany, and Mark from Brooklyn, New York. Marks are the best. Woo! So thanks to Mark and Mark. Yeah! You've made this Mark very happy. Axelay! I'm glad to have finally played Axelay. Konami, where's the remake? I demand it from you. I'm also sending a thank you to my good friend and Robotech watching buddy Dan for giving me his 32-inch CRT television that was taking up half your garage. My back is still feeling it. That thing is heavy. Woo! Yes! Number 1. Hey, Mr. New. I'll get to you later. Nobody should ever throw away a CRT television. Just give it to a friend who collects old school game consoles. They're the way these old games were meant to be played. What is this, Darius? Ah! So thanks to Mark and Dan, this is Axelay on the Super Nintendo, which can also be downloaded from Nintendo's Virtual Console. I highly recommend it because it's good, and your ears will love you. Good luck. Nobody likes a fire sandworm.
It's Classic Game Room broadcasting from space, and I've got a copy of Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo here. You know, this game is so popular, they should make a movie based on it.
Johnny Cage.
Hey, I like the Mortal Kombat movie, but you know I'm probably the only person on Earth who prefers Pit Fighter when it comes to video games. That's right, I've never really gotten into the Mortal Kombat series, although I seem to be playing my way through all of them. Here's the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat, spelled with a K. From 1993, published by Acclaim, this is a super sanitized version of Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Mortal Kombat without blood and guts. That's like non-alcoholic beer. So is Diet Mortal Kombat Free, Mortal Kombat Zero any good? Well, it looks nice. And it has your Mortal Kombat style music and sound effects, also it plays well. But there's no blood. Well, if you had a Super Nintendo back in the day, you could either just go to the arcade or bowling alley and play Mortal Kombat, or get the Shirley Temple version for your home game console. And that's probably the only time in history anyone ever said Shirley Temple and Mortal Kombat in the same sentence. The special moves are fairly easy to execute, and like normal with the Mortal Kombat series, you're not going to get very far in the game without them. Anyway, this is one of those games that you either like or don't like. Technically, it's a nice 16-bit version of the game, but it's like an Arnold Palmer without the lemonade. Come on. You're just drinking iced tea without the blood. Oh, wait. Well, no, that's kind of weird. Never mind. I think this is one of the rare cases when we can all agree that the Atari Jaguar did it better. And I'm not talking about Mortal Kombat, I'm talking about Kasumi Ninja. Because in 1994, if you were playing this game, you know secretly you wanted Kasumi Ninja, because that game had blood and a dude who would shoot fireballs from under his kilt. Here's a big shout out to Dylan from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, who sent this game to the show. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, because we need to keep the Super Nintendo versus Atari Jaguar war raging. Gotta keep it alive, and the Jaguar doesn't win very often, so when it does, we just give it credit. Kasumi Ninja is better than this version of Mortal Kombat. So is Tattoo Assassins in the arcade. I'm absolutely awful at this game, but here's my recommendation. If you love the Super Nintendo and you're still living in 1993 and want to play Mortal Kombat, I recommend that you wait a year and buy Kasumi Ninja for the Jaguar. The Atari Jaguar does what the Super Nintendo don't. It don't sell very much.
Welcome to Classic Game Room for the review of Phalanx on the Super Nintendo, a fun spaceship shooter with the least spaceship shooter-ish cartridge artwork that I've ever seen. What does an old guy playing a banjo with his dog have to do with spaceships? I think it's so weird I actually like it. What they don't tell you is that his dog is named Truxton. Roll over. Fetch. Good boy, Truxton. Phalanx, released in 1992, is a game that shows that the creator of the cartridge artwork should have gone to the Atari School of Design. You're supposed to make the game's artwork look better than the game, not the other way around. The only thing that could possibly improve this design is if someone went in there with whiteout and retitled it, which of course they did. Thanks, Ben. Chemco. Sounds like a company that should make auto parts, doesn't it? Brake pads by Chemco. Chemco! Phalanx. Beyond the artwork, this game is pretty good and was released when these games were the hot games. Can you imagine that? Like, instead of every game being some kind of a Skyrim, Minecraft, or Call of Duty clone, games wanted to be Thunder Force. That sounds like the greatest thing ever. And this game so desperately wants to be Thunder Force. And I'm okay with that. Yeah! Because even though I'm Sega Genesis fanboy Mark, I appreciate the Super Nintendo's slightly different style, and this game rocks it on the SNES. The music is great, the visuals are great, the gameplay is really good. It may not be the best spaceship shooter out there, but it's definitely one of the best on the Super Nintendo. Hunter! It should say Hunter, but it doesn't, because that's a different game! Phalanx is one of the best games in this genre on the Super Nintendo, not because the Super Nintendo is bad at playing them, but because there really weren't very many of them released for the 16-bit SNES. Games like Thunder Spirits, Super R-Type, and Earth Defense Force come to mind, as well as Phalanx. One to add to your collection while shouting EDF at the top of your lungs. You are not worthy to be destroyed by me. It should be your honor to be killed by Mark. Seriously though, these games are a dime a dozen on the Genesis, where you have what seems like hundreds of them available. Now we're shooting robot fish. Doesn't Darius have the trademark on all underwater sea creatures that shoot lasers at your spaceship? You've got to admire this thing's determination. Like, it's going to die, it's just a matter of when. I like Phalanx, but despite the fact it's one of the few on the SNES, it's hard to say what really makes this game stand out, beyond the weird-ass artwork. It's a very persistent enemy with his arms blown off and just got like a little mouth going. Really, how effective is that? Stage clear! Very 90s. Should be extreme stage clear! Saved by the Bell edition. This game also reminds me of Whip Rush on the Sega Genesis. Basically, this game just wants to be on the Sega Genesis. But it's not, it's on the Super Nintendo. Which is an acceptable alternative. Sometimes. Feel the bias from Sega Genesis fanboy Mark wearing the Atari hat in front of a Sega sign while playing Super Nintendo in front of the Atari 7800, next to a Laserdisc player. That's how I roll in space. And this game rolls with a water level. Yes, it has one of those too. And Phalanx is a fairly lengthy game for this genre. It's also really tough. Maybe the old dude with a beard and banjo and dog is the final end boss. I don't know because I haven't made it that far yet. By level 5, this game gets merciless. Here's how we're gonna do this. I'm gonna kill all of you, and you're gonna give me big points. Got it? Good, as long as we're on the same page. If you're gonna make one of these games, you've got to have the dangerous cave level, the subterranean cavern where you could crash into the walls at any time, and I like these enemies, which I believe are brain eels in floating tanker trucks. Credit where credit's due, Phalanx has its moments. Suddenly, we have gotten to the part of the game inspired by aliens. Every one of these games has that level. You know that level. As you've probably noticed, there's numerous weapon types, 4 in total, I think, each of which can be powered up. You can also pick up some extra missiles and those floating things that rotate around your spaceship. You can destroy them for a super bomb. My favorite weapon in the game is the lasers. The hunter weapon from Thunder Force seems to get targeted on the wrong things at times, and then you get killed, so... Screw you, Death Snake! Be careful with that one. Why don't you go back to Thunder Force, where you belong? Frequently, I looked at this game and immediately saw Thunder Force or R-Type or Gradius inspiration. Other times, it's like Phalanx is totally doing its own thing here. I don't know what this is, a floating rock with some intestines? Why not? Last Starfighter! And on that note, I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you going to my man Ben from Buffalo, New York. Thank you, Ben, for sending Phalanx to the show, along with some sweet custom artwork. The galaxy is destroyed. Again! It's always my fault. At times, Phalanx is somewhat forgiving because you can take 3 hits before you're destroyed. Other times, it just pins you into a corner and kills you instantly. It's somewhat unbalanced, but on the whole, it's a good spaceship shooter on the Super Nintendo. Totally worth owning. So thanks again, Ben, and thanks to the old dude playing the banjo. You really liven things up. It's Phalanx! Welcome to Classic Game Room, where I'm bringing you the review of Derby Stallion 96 on the Super Famicom. Smells like tacos. It's time for another ultra-professional review of a game that I have no idea how to play. I can't read it, there's no instructions. It's Derby Stallion 96 on the Super Famicom, which is, according to the internet, a horse breeding and racing business simulation game as far as I'm concerned. We're genetically engineering horses for global domination. The first thing you do is go to the horse disco and auction marketplace. We're gonna buy this horse and equip it with laser beams. We're gonna have a little discussion here with my technician, Jersey Slims. Yes, let's do that. Definitely. Right. You never argue with Jersey Slims, or else the horses will wake up with your head in their bed. Here's the trophy room, and as you can see, I've won countless very small trophies for engineering the most dangerous horses. Love the music, and as you can see, the graphics are amazing. I have no idea what the hell's going on here. Hey, let's buy a horse for 710, yen? Quarters? Pennies? I don't know. Then we'll move on to this screen, which looks like the menu. That's for the horses that didn't make it. Yes, you animal rights activists might think that Derby Stallion 96 is cruel. There's nothing wrong with messing with nature, as long as people get hurt. Because remember, this game is for the horses, I think. As long as they read Japanese. This game would be so much better if it was like Planet of the Apes with horses. Like Charlton Heston travels into the future, lands on Earth only to find a bunch of talking horses. How awesome would that be? Better than this game, probably. To be fair, it's probably at least somewhat more entertaining if you read Japanese, but I don't see the thrill in just breeding horses and then watching them race. You don't do anything. You literally just sit there and watch the horses race. There is a VCR feature though, which is quite fun. I mean, who doesn't love VCRs? Hooray! That horse wins. It's spared. The rest of them get turned into tacos, along with their human riders. See, this is where you select your value meal. Number 4 comes with fries. There's so much missed opportunity here. Like, we could use these horses to form a new Voltron, or battle King Ghidorah, jump on mushrooms. I mean, come on. Just genetically engineering horses, or at least breeding horses and watching them run. Where's the fun in this? I don't get it. This is like one of those weird racing games where you don't actually race. You watch other people on screen race, and then you just do nothing. You know what's better? Almost anything. I kind of figured this screen out. Horses that go into that door never return. Here's the VCR mode. If you look closely, you'll notice it's a hi-hi stereo VCR, which one-ups a hi-fi stereo VCR, naturally. Oh, Derby Stallion 96. What's amazing is that there's a whole lot of these games spread across the Famicom, PC, PlayStation, Sega Saturn. Somebody out there must really like genetically engineering horses. And watching them lose and get ground up into delicious tacos. It's got a gamey flavor. And what's this? A fingernail? Part of a shoe? Is it good? Is it bad? You know, I have no idea. Sometimes you just gotta play a game that you can't figure out how to play. To put the rest of them in perspective, I prefer Pac-Man. The banner in the background says Cyborg Horse, so I think that really is what we're doing. And it appears that you can even insert a Game Boy game into this or something. Yeah, I don't know about this one, but hey, I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Jeremy from Cape Girardeau in Missouri. Thanks, Jeremy. And hey, thanks for sending the sequels, too. If they don't add the Transformable Robot Forms Voltron mode into the next one, I'll be very disappointed. It's Derby Stallion. 96 flavors of tacos. Welcome to Classic Game Room for the review of Cyberspin on the Super Nintendo. This game is waiting to kick your ass. Literally. It's very hard. And it has a foot. Somewhere. Have you ever watched anyone who's insanely good at Japanese spaceship shooters play an extremely challenging one and make it look easy, only to play it yourself and realize you can't get through the first level? That, my friends, is a good analogy for Cyberspin, a deceptively lighthearted game for the Super Nintendo, which is pure evil. Have a box of tissues nearby if you dare play this one, because Cyberspin is tough. It's not bad, but it will require RPG levels of time and dedication, because you have to memorize every turn in this game if you're going to get anywhere in Cyberspin. There's simply no time to react. The screen is zoomed in so far you can't see anything, and this is the future, so you're driving insanely fast. It's a fun game if you like memorization and extreme challenge on top of that, because this is like a two-step process. You have to memorize the track and get through a qualifying round, which then lets you into the race with other drivers who do everything that they can to get in your way and disrupt what you've just memorized. If you crash into anything, you lose. If you spin out, you lose. If you hit the brakes, you lose. I made it through 2 levels in this game, both times in first place, because if you don't win, you lose. There's no in between. You'll never end up in like 3rd. However, each time I actually won, it was like the greatest feeling of satisfaction ever. If you like these top-down racing games from the era, you should play Cyberspin, because it's actually really good from the style and music and gameplay standpoint. It takes this familiar formula and then, of course, brings it into the future where you're racing against robots because they never make a mistake. Hopefully they're hot robots. They're certainly mean ones, I'll say that. Constantly getting in your way. Don't try to pass anything in a turn. The L and R buttons on your Super Nintendo controllers will let you drift around turns, but that's useless, and braking is even worse. You have to just accelerate the entire time, never miss a turn, and use your turbo boost in the straightaways, especially if you need to pass one of your opponents. Notice there's a power bar that depletes when you use your turbo boost or run into things. You can take a pit stop, but there's no point because then you lose. And if you don't win, you can't move on to the next level. There's a handy password system with some pleasant 16-bit scenery to admire as you enter your password, and if you crash during a race, you can continue. Cyberspin was sent to the show by Chris from Jersey City, New Jersey! This game is brutal, but I do like it. If you like these top-down racers, and you're looking for a really fast, really challenging one, get this. It plays well, but expecting Cyberspin to be easy would be like expecting a shark to not eat you if you're bleeding. That's what sharks do, especially when they're on fire. So there you go, Cyberspin for the Super Nintendo. It's good provided you have time to memorize it, and quick reflexes on top of that. Thanks again, Chris. Happy crashing, burning, and dying, Cyberspin. ClassicGameRoom.com. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where you know I love my spaceship shooters, but how about one with a little octopus, or a baby shooting lasers, the thing from Twin Bee? It must be Parodius on the Super Famicom, one of the best games ever.
Most definitely. According to the internet, it's called Gokujo Parodius, which I no doubt mispronounced, the third game in the awesome Parodius series. A side-scrolling spaceship shooter-style game which is essentially a parody of Gradius, with characters from a bunch of other Konami games like Twin Bee, who's actually one of the tougher spaceships to use. As you see on screen, Parodius is lively, colorful, and really fun. I love the music. It may play like a lot of other games, but stylistically it's quite different. In stark contrast to most other side-scrolling spaceship shooters, you're not diving through the bowels of some horrible creature or crawling through a dark spaceship wiping out creepy aliens. You're blowing up chickens and pirouetting panda bears. It's like a perpetual sugar high. Not only is Gokujo Parodius incredibly likable and very Japanese, this is a Super Famicom release after all, but it's also a kick-ass game. Even when you're controlling the Vic Viper from Gradius instead of an octopus or little Dracula, the game is still wild, wacky, and really good. But don't mistake silly, goofy visuals, good humor, and marching band music for easy. Like most games in this genre, Parodius will hand you your own ass. Getting anywhere past the third level requires a lot of practice and mastery of at least one of the characters in the game. There's a lot of them to choose from, which is another one of its strengths, because for the most part they're all really different. Little Dracula has homing missiles. The baby shoots milk bottles. This thing does whatever this thing does. What is it? I don't know what that is. The weird-ass fish is probably my favorite, and each character has different upgrade paths. For a Super Famicom release, or
well, Super Nintendo as they're known in the West. The visuals are excellent. It's a bright, vibrant, colorful game, which does suffer from some serious slowdown when things really get busy. But, you know, in these games, sometimes that's quite welcome. What's that now? You've blown up again? Don't worry, you have several credits and numerous continues because you'll want to see where this game goes. It just keeps getting weirder, and that's part of why it's so good. There's also a 2-player option if you have a friend who wants to play with you, which they will when they find out you have this, because it's awesome. My immediate favorite Super Famicom release was sent to the show by Osamu from Ibaraki, Japan. So a huge Classic Game Room shout-out. And thank you to Osamu, because this game is simply amazing. I can't recommend it highly enough, because it's such a breath of fresh air in a genre where a lot of games feel very similar. If you like Gradius, Life Force, Salamander, R-Type, or just about anything else that looks and plays like this, you'll like Parodius. Ah, my fish got blown up again. You see, that's where little Dracula's pretty good. Anyway, I foresee myself playing this game a lot, so a huge thank you to Osamu, and hopefully some of you listening can also pick up a copy of this one and enjoy it yourself. Just make sure to watch out for the giant hammers surrounded by evil bunny rabbits, that they can be tricky.
Banished from Earth Classic Game Room broadcasts from the intergalactic space arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room for a review of a game based on everyone's favorite hero with a neckerchief. It's Speed Racer on the Super Nintendo. I've always been a huge fan of Speed Racer ever since I was a kid, so I gotta tell you I was pretty excited when I saw Speed Racer for the Super Nintendo and had high hopes that this game would indeed be super. After all, it's Speed Racer, right? He drives the Mach 5, he gets down with Trixie, and he's a badass who pulls off the neckerchief with ease. Not so much though, because this game falls into the pit of a game that tries to do two things at once, neither of them very well. It's like Destination Earthstar, except with more neckerchief. I mean, you've gotta give Speed credit. Not everyone can pull off that look. Most guys look like sissies with a neckerchief. Chuck Norris, circa 1979, with neckerchief, sissy. Speed Racer, badass. Sadly, this game isn't. It's a combination driving game and side-scrolling platformer. Disappointingly, the platforming is the better of the two. How's that possible? Speed Racer runs at a smooth 1 frame per second, maybe, if that. And that pretty much kills the racing part of the game. This is like the Gamecom. well, maybe not that bad. After all, it does have color, but on the other hand, we also expect more from the Super Nintendo. It's called the Super Nintendo. It should be more super than this. Let me handle things. Maybe Racer X will make it better. What are you keeping your entire sock drawer in your pants? Speed Racer would be very disappointed in his own game, but I kinda see where they were going with this because it's like the TV show in that there's story followed by a race. So you play through the story with the platforming segments and then race. Except neither of them are very good. The TV show was actually pretty good. This isn't. It's actually borderline god-awful, to be honest. Like, how does the same game system that delivers Super Mario Kart, Super Metroid, and Contra III play this? Like this? Why? Why? Did Accolade confuse themselves with Acclaim for a moment? Or were they both bought out by LJN? It's as bad as it looks. This doesn't play well at all. Even though your cars have turbo boost, and they can jump, and the Mach 5's got like saw blades and stuff, and it's the Mach 5, which is, you know, one of the coolest cars ever. It's terrible. I mean, visually, it looks okay. It definitely has the style of Speed Racer, but the most exciting part of the entire game is throwing him off the train, which is actually kind of funny. Trixie!
What? Who's there? What do you want?
Ha ha ha! Oh, Speed Racer! If you want to see your girlfriend Trixie again, pull out of the next race! Signed, Captain Terror! P.S. I'm a raging douchebag! Even the music in this game sounds depressed. I've gotta help Trixie! Oh. Here, I'll give away the ending. When you beat the game, Speed walks in on Trixie with Voltron. She knows what a real man is. 5 robot lions, one of them piloted by a babe. That's right. This is how my mind works. Also, I have nothing else to talk about, so just picture that. Speed Racer. The platforming is disinteresting and the driving is terrible. But that doesn't stop me from sending a huge classic game room shout out and thank you to Dent from Lake Mississippi. Thank you, Dent. It's Speed Racer for the Super Nintendo. Under no conditions should you actually try to play this game. Just watch the TV show instead. Or Voltron. Or that amazing combination of the two. Oh, Trixie! Princess Allura! Whoa! I'll just hang out over here in the corner with Hunk and watch. I'll cut that line out in editing.